This research is called Neighborhood Social Capital and Social Learning for Experience Attributes of Products. So right there in the title are some of the key ingredients that we want to think about. The first is neighborhood social capital, meaning the extent to which people trust and know each other and interact with each other offline. Social learning means that information is transferred from an existing customer to a potential customer, and then experience attributes of products are products for which it's very hard to know what they're going to be like until you try the product on. We're thinking about fashion apparel, eyewear, those kinds of things, where you'd really like to have a visceral experience. So what this research is really about is about how to figure out where those customers live who are most likely to talk about the product and therefore generate new sales, particularly for products where some explanation is required. So there are two really important takeaways here for anyone who's in the online world selling things through the internet. The first is that it's very, very critical to understand what the offline environment looks like. Why is it that you have some customers in one location and no customers in another? What is it about the physical world that's affecting what's going on in the virtual world? That's the first thing. The second thing that this research really emphasizes is that existing customers are often the most powerful source of new customers for a firm. The extent to which they advocate, to which the product they're using is socially visible, and the extent to which they talk about it with friends and family and local others that they come into contact with. So with any piece of research, it's always nice to find something that's a little bit surprising or counterintuitive, and there were really three things here. The first thing was that this social and learning effect was really quite large. Up to half of the new customers that came into the firm that we studied, bonobos.com, got there because the information was shared from one customer to another in an offline environment. That was the first thing. The second thing was that this effect became more important over time. So people who were the first customers into the firm, maybe they're going off their own information or their own feel, or they're fairly risk-seeking people. People who come later on tend to require a little bit more hand-holding from others. And then the third thing that was very, very interesting is that this notion of social capital, or the extent to which people trust and interact with each other in a local neighborhood, doesn't generate sales per se. What it does is it makes information transfer more efficient. So if bad information is being spread, this company's no good, it's going to slow down sales. In this case, fortunately for Bonobos, what was being transmitted was positive, and therefore sales sped up. So the first thing that's really important for an e-commerce business to understand is that the offline environment is going to explain a lot about the success of online sales. So the firm really needs to think about what kind of locations are going to be most fruitful and why, and then go into those locations and try and seed customers. Secondly, if the firm wants to make the products socially visible. Some products are naturally socially visible. If I'm wearing glasses or I'm wearing a pair of pants, people might ask me about them, or I might be able to generate a conversation. If a product's not socially visible, then maybe there's a way to make it socially visible by having it shipped to the office rather than the home, for example. So let's give a practical example that really ties all of this together. So the firm that we looked at, bonobos.com, is a men's fashion retailer, and what we found was in locations where customers were more apt to talk to each other and trust each other, there was a greater sales diffusion online. So the target customer in this case is a male aged 25 to 45 who's somewhat fashion forward, and it just so turns out that a good proxy for where those males are congregating is the number of bars and liquor stores per capita in a location. So we had some sociological theory that told us about interaction, and then we were able to go to public data and find a variable that was actually a pretty good proxy. So it's tying those things together, thinking about the theory, and then trying to find a proxy with real data. So one strategy that an e-commerce firm can pursue, which is really just an outcrop of what they're already doing, is to append the zip code data that they collect naturally through the sales process with other data about what's going on in that zip code. This can be coming from the US Census or for other third-party suppliers. So for example, if I'm Bonobos, I'd like to know how many fashion apparel stores there were in a location. I'd like to know what the population density was, what the age distribution was, the presence or absence of a college campus. Those things will tell me quite a lot about why I might have high sales in one location and low sales in another. So it's really just appending to what is already being done. That's the first thing that an e-commerce company should be thinking about. This is really a very, very general conclusion that even though there are a number of companies out there now selling things online through the virtual world, if you will, all of those companies are selling to customers who still live in the real world. So understanding the real world circumstance of your customer, what other offline options they have, who they live next to, how they interact with a local environment, is a really critical ingredient, perhaps the most critical ingredient for understanding whether or not they're going to shop online or offline, how they're going to search, and also with whom they're going to interact and spread the good news about your product. So one thing that's getting a lot of press in the news right now, in fact, a great buzzword, and being in marketing, we love buzzwords, is this notion of omni-channel, online, offline, being integrated seamlessly. And I think what we've seen is there are firms who came out very strongly early on, perhaps even Bonobos, who was the subject in this study in 2007, when they first started saying, why would anyone ever bother to operate offline when you can sell through this wondrous thing called the internet? But I think what everybody is realizing now, whether you Rent the Runway or Birchbox or even Amazon, in addition to Warby Parker, Bonobos, and many others, is that you really need to operate both online and offline. There are certain things that an online environment does for you. It makes fulfillment easy. It makes it easy to scale. But there are other critical things that offline does for you as well. It makes it much easier to relay information to other people. It also makes it much easier to build credibility about your brand if you really have a physical world presence. So I think we're seeing more and more of this discussion now of what it means to be omni-channel, not just present in one world, but present in both. So this study really dispels a couple of misconceptions. The first misconception that I've talked about already a little bit is the fact that the online world is somehow disconnected from the offline. So the first misconception is really that the offline world is explaining a lot of what's going on in the online world, and also the offline world is actually pretty easy to understand. There's been a whole history of very, very rich data being collected about who's living where, what are they doing, what's the level of commercial activity, and so on. So that's really the first thing that it dispels. The second thing, and we hear this for years and years in commerce, is that location is very, very important. But we tend to think about the location of the firm. Where do we put the store? Where do we operate the factory? Which country should we be in? But here what we're finding is it's still about location, but this time it's about the location of the customer. Where is that customer, and to whom does that customer also live? That's what's really important in the world of e-commerce. So I think one really novel aspect of this research is it's really combining ideas from two different fields, and data, in fact, from two different fields. So in this case, we're talking about some ideas that come from sociology, why it is that people trust each other and interact with each other, and also some ideas from marketing about how information gets communicated and how people relay ideas from one person to the next. In addition, it's also combining data from two disparate sources that are not often used. The first source of data is the Social Capital Community Benchmark Survey. I know that's a mouthful. That's coming from the Kennedy School, collected by Robert Putnam, who was involved in writing the book Bowling Alone about the collapse and revival of social capital in America. And then secondly, data coming from the firm itself, bonobos.com, founded by Andy Dunn. So what we were able to do was sort of merge theories from sociology and marketing, and also merge data collected for another purpose with real data coming from a prominent e-commerce firm. So this is a very, very rich area, this whole online, offline, omni-channel interaction. So the next thing I'd like to look at is how customers who are exposed to the firm in one world, let's say the offline world, might continue to interact with the firm through the online world. So lots being written right now about pop-up stores. Warby Parker has a bus running around the US and so on. And so I want to actually give a shout out to Lawrence Lanahan, one of our alums who runs First Mark Capital in New York, came and spoke in my class, and he gave a very, very interesting analogy. He said that, for example, when I interact with somebody, let's call him Joe, and it's over email, it's a very low energy interaction. We don't know each other. And then Joe and I get on the phone, and Joe hears my accent, I hear his Long Island accent, our energy level goes up. And then we go out and we have a couple of beers and we have dinner, and we really get to know each other. So then the next time an email comes out, the energy level has now been elevated to here. And so it is in some sense with online and offline. So we're going to look at the customers that were acquired by Warby Parker for eyewear, Bonobos for fashion clothing. If the first experience was offline and it was a good experience, are we able then to subsequently serve these customers online? And there's great operational advantages from doing so because it's much, much cheaper to fulfill that customer out of a warehouse than to always having them come into a retail store. So that's really where I want to go next. Again, research being inspired by some of our alum and colleagues from the Wharton School.